Okay, so I want to do a little bit of discussion or notes on the circulatory system and kind of give you an overview. I want to change the way I do these notes for you guys. Instead of doing them point by point by point of what the curriculum is and making it something that you have to memorize, I'd rather have a general context for which you can then embed the details. So this video is meant to be a general context that will help you figure out how the circulatory system fits with the other systems that we've learned about and that we will be learning about soon. So again, we're talking about the circulatory system. And I think it's important for you to know exactly what that system is. And when we talk about circulatory, we're talking about circulation. And so we're talking really about a system of transporting things around the body. Things around the body. In particular, the human body is what we're talking about here. So when we talk about the human body, what you should be thinking about is blood. But before we actually talk about the blood, let's talk about what those things are that are being transported around the body. Because I think that that's important to think about and know. So the things that we're talking about really are not all things. So remember, know that all things are either matter or energy. And so when we often say thing, we're talking about something as matter, but there's a form of energy that's moving around through your body that's heat, which is kind of interesting because it's a byproduct of cellular respiration. We're going to talk a little bit more about cellular respiration, but it's a byproduct which is really good because it helps maintain our body at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit so that we can maintain homeostasis. And if you think back to content that you need to know as to why temperature matters in the human body, think about what happens to enzymes as the heat increases beyond the norm for those enzymes. Remember that the optimal temperature for our enzymes is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not the optimal temperature for all living things. So heat is a byproduct, but it's also necessary to maintain our body temperature and maintain that homeostasis. In addition to heat, nutrients move around our circulatory system. Remember the definition of nutrients are chemicals that are or substances that are found in our food and are used by the body. We've got oxygen, which you often think of as a nutrient, but it's not found in our food. Well, it's not. Oxygen gas is not found in the food, and that's not how we get our oxygen gas. We've got carbon dioxide flowing through in our blood. We've got urea, which we've talked about as a waste product that is a nitrogenous salt or a salt that has nitrogen in it. That nitrogen comes from the amine group of the amino acids when someone eats too much protein or simply when you're exchanging out your old protein for your new protein. But it's traveling through your blood, it goes to your kidneys filter out that urea, and it combines, that urea salt combines with water and flushes out of your system as urine. We've got antibodies, which we'll learn a little bit more about soon enough, but you know that anti means against. So these are things that fight infections, and hormones. So we've learned about iodine and iodine deficiencies. Iodine is involved in thyroxine, which is made by the thyroid gland. Thyroxine is a hormone that's released into the bloodstream. It goes around your body looking for places to trigger a reaction. But it goes all around your body. Sometimes the places it doesn't need to go, but it's looking for places to trigger a reaction. So those are the things that are being transported around your body. So it's all a system of transporting things and energy throughout your body. So, and all of those things travel through the system or through your nervous system. So, your circulatory system and your nervous system connect all parts of your body together. So, I actually want to, before we go into details about this, sorry about that pop up there. One of the things that I want to talk a little bit about is some of these things that are traveling through your body is a reactant to a reactant of, or the reactants of cellular respiration. So I know this is not particularly tied to this content, but I want to provide you some context. So cellular respiration, if you remember correctly, happens in the mitochondria, but in fact we'll learn a little bit more detail about this. It happens in the cytoplasm and the mitochondria, but this is the process by which we make usable energy. And we're talking about energy that's usable to us, and that is in the form of ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. Remember, one of the elements that you need to know is phosphorus, and here it is. So we need to have phosphorus in our diet so that we're making ATP, but it's also used in our nerves, which we'll talk about when we talk about action potential soon enough. So that's the process, and we need to talk a little bit about reactants and products. So one of the reactants in this process is glucose, which, if you remember correctly, is a monosaccharide, and oxygen. And that gives way to carbon dioxide plus water plus ATP. So this is the overall unbalanced, very basic equation for cellular respiration. We will be learning a lot more detail than just this equation, which is maybe all that you learned in 9th grade. Maybe you learned more than that. I hope you did, but that's the basic thing. So we're talking about this process happening in the cytoplasm and the mitochondria of every single cell in your body. Some of your cells have more mitochondria than others, namely your heart, because your heart needs to have lots of ATP in order to constantly be pumping. If it ever ran out of ATP, it wouldn't have the usable energy to pump and push blood and all of those nutrients and all of these other things around your body. So it's really important that glucose and oxygen get around your body so that your cells can have ATP, so they can continue to pump these things around your body and make more ATP. But we need to talk about where this glucose comes from. If you remember back to our, maybe I should do some different color here. If you remember back to our digestive system notes, glucose is one of the nutrients that we find in our food. It's one of many types of monosaccharides. We've got fructose, we've got galactose as another example. But these are all monosaccharides that either we ate as a monosaccharide or we digested through hydrolysis reactions with the aid of enzymes into these monosaccharides from di or polysaccharides. Well, those glucose molecules found their way in your mouth, down your esophagus to your stomach, to your small intestines, and crossed the epithelial cells of your villi, which have the microvilli, into the capillaries, and therefore were found within the blood and the circulatory system, and were able to move around the body and then move into individual cells to be broken down in this process of cellular respiration with the end goal of making ATP. But this is only one of those nutrients. Don't forget about lipids and amino acids, which all enter the circulatory system at the villi and move around the body. Know that lipids, so we say glucose is one of the reactants for cellular respiration, but lipids are often converted into an intermediary of the process. So glucose gets converted into something else before it goes through this long process, and lipids can be converted into that intermediary thing before this long process happens. So if glucose or sugars aren't around for energy, our bodies turn to lipids or fats. I hope that makes sense to you. So let me make sure. Okay, let's talk about oxygen real fast. So where do the oxygen come from? How did they get to the mitochondria of your individual cells? Well, your mitochondria get the oxygen, of course, by breathing it in. And so just to foreshadow a little bit, that oxygen diffuses across the alveoli, and there's gas exchange of the oxygen for CO2. So one of the byproducts of the cellular respiration is this carbon dioxide, which then finds its way back into the circulatory system, and you breathe it out into your lungs as oxygen is coming into your lungs and into your blood. And moves around your body. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the respiratory system. And then this water, and then the water often leaves our body through sweat or through our breath or through our urine, as I mentioned earlier, as it removes the excess nitrogen from the excess consumption of proteins. All right, so all this stuff is coming in and out of our bodies, and it's going into this system, the circulatory system, or a system that's made of plasma, blood plasma, erythrocytes, which are a fancy name for red blood cells. We've got leukocytes, which are white blood cells, and we've got platelets. And these are the major parts of blood, but don't forget water, of course, as part of that. And these things transfer those nutrients to cells all around your body that then can be used or assimilated into other structures. So what is it that moves blood around your body? It's not just flowing without any input. And I hope you know the answer to that, and that would be your heart, right? So your heart pumps blood around your body. So you should know that the heart is one part of the circulatory system. It pumps blood, which is another part, and that blood flows through blood vessels. And the three major types of blood vessels that you need to know, that you should understand, are arteries, veins, and capillaries. Now, you may think that you know the definitions of these three, and I bet that many of you are incorrect. So it's important that you pay attention to this as a reference. I'm going to go ahead and keep scrolling down here. So I'm going to just draw the heart. This is a rough sketch as a box. It doesn't look like a heart shape like you see around Valentine's Day. But let's say that this is the heart, and we'll go into more detail about this in a few minutes. If this is the heart, it sits between the lungs. So I'm going to draw the lungs as best as I can. These are terrible lungs, but just trying to drive home a point. All right, so the lungs sit on either side of the heart. Now, just as a reference, when we draw hearts like this, it's as if you're looking at a patient's heart. So this side would be the right side, even though it's on your left. It's the patient's right lung, and this is the patient's left lung. I know that's confusing, but this doesn't just come with practice. The more you practice labeling these kinds of things. So we know that blood from the heart travels to the lungs. And then it also travels from the lungs back to the heart. And then it travels to the rest of the body. And then back to the heart. Now, obviously, this is not what it looks like in your body, but how it travels in your body, but this is the pathway. There are two major parts. The parts of that in which blood flows from the heart to the lungs is known as the pulmonary circuit. Pulmonary means lung. And the point of the pulmonary circuit is to get oxygen into the blood and carbon dioxide out of the blood. Carbon dioxide is toxic, so we need to get it out of the blood. When it goes to the rest of the body, this is known as the systemic circuit. So blood is flowing throughout the body system. Some of that blood is actually fueling the lung so that it can survive and get its nutrients and its oxygen so they can continue to survive. But the part here where the blood is going to the heart to get oxygen is called the pulmonary circuit. Now, the part that I said about the definitions of arteries, veins, and capillaries comes into play here. Blood flows from the heart to the lungs through the pulmonary artery, but it does not have, it's not considered to be oxygenated, rather. It's got more carbon dioxide than it does oxygen. And so a lot of people think that arteries carry blood away from the heart and have oxygen. But that's not the definition. The definition of an artery is any blood vessel that carries blood away from the heart, and that's the end of the definition. So the pulmonary artery is the exception because this one does not have oxygen. It's actually deoxygenated. It's going to the lungs to get oxygen. From the lungs, it comes back through the pulmonary vein, but it does have oxygen now, and it comes back to the heart. And then it leaves the heart through some arteries, the major one being the aorta, but some arteries that carry the blood, oxygenated blood away from the heart to go to the rest of the body. It's giving off oxygen to every single cell. It's picking up carbon dioxide from the mitochondria of every single cell and carrying that back to the heart. And then from the heart, it carries that carbon dioxide back to the lungs for that gas exchange that I spoke of earlier to get rid of that carbon dioxide and pull in more oxygen, and it repeats over and over and over again. So, to review, an artery is a blood vessel that carries blood away from the heart, veins carry blood to the heart, and capillaries are the small, thin blood vessels where exchange of nutrients and other materials actually happens because it's so small. It's so small, only one cell can go through at a time. They go in a single file line. And this is where we see, well, this is when you cut your finger, you're not cutting through, usually, I hope, a major artery or vein, but when you get a paper cut, you're cutting through many, many little capillaries. Remember that every cell in your body needs nutrients, and it needs oxygen, it needs to get rid of carbon dioxide, it needs heat, and those capillaries are so small. You can't see them with your eye, but they're going to every single cell in your body, and if they weren't, you'd be dead. When you get in the really cold and you feel your hands get really pale and you can't feel them anymore, it's because your capillaries are no longer open and allowing blood to flow through them. It's saving that blood for your core, for your vital organs, but your fingertips and your toes are not getting the blood that they need, and they lose color, and they start to hurt. Let's see. Okay, so let's zoom in on the heart here, and then I think we'll call it quits. All right, so we've got the heart, and it's okay to draw this box on the test if you need to draw a box as a schematic of the heart. I've drawn that rectangle. I've divided it as closely to half as possible. We've got 4 boxes. This horizontal line is a little higher up because these 2 chambers of the heart are larger than the top 2 chambers, and I'm going to shade in this one to indicate that this one has more muscle mass. So this has a thicker muscle wall lining than this one. So this is the right atrium. This is the left atrium. And again, the right and left are switched because you're looking at a patient's heart. And then this is the right ventricle. And this is the left ventricle. And you need to know the way that blood flows. And I'm going to denote blue for deoxygenated blood. Know that your blood is not blue though. Okay, so deoxygenated blood from the rest of the body, so from the systemic circuit coming back to the heart, blood flows into the right atrium. It passes the AV valve, or the atrioventricular valve, and out of the right ventricle. It goes through a semilunar valve, flows to the lungs to get oxygen, and then now that it's oxygenated, it's coming to the left atrium through another atrioventricular valve, the left atrioventricular valve, into the left ventricle, and then this gets a little confusing. It comes out of the aorta, which is a major blood vessel. It breaks down into smaller arteries and into the capillaries, so it goes to the rest of the body. It's losing oxygen as it does so, and it returns back deoxygenated. So again, this right here, because it's leaving the heart to go to the lungs, it's an artery, and because it's going to the lungs, it's called the pulmonary artery, which would make this, because it's going back to the heart, a vein, but the pulmonary vein. Okay? This aorta would be a form of an artery because it's leaving the heart, and this vessel coming back, called the vena cava, would be a vein because it's coming back to the heart. Okay? I think that's where I'm going to stop. Let me just double check that I didn't want to say anything else. Nope, that's all I'm going to say. This is an overview. There's a lot of detail. You got to know the difference between arteries, veins, and capillaries in a little more detail than that. You got to actually know what's triggering the heartbeats and understand that process, which we can talk about if you still have questions, and explain the heartbeats in terms of collecting blood, pumping blood, and opening and closing valves here. And again, if you have questions, we'll talk about them. But that's extra detail that I think is a little more interesting to talk about. So, yep, okay. No, and also know that the heart also needs ATP. It needs the nutrients from this circulatory system in order to keep pumping the blood around to the rest of the body. And it has its own special types of arteries that from the aorta come right back and fuel all the heart cells to keep pumping. So it counts as rest of the body. That includes the heart itself. Okay, let's call it quits there.